I'm Mary Simpson from the Glencoe District Historical Society, and I'm interviewing Al. Al, what's your full name and where did you go to school and grow up?
Full name is John Alistair McGregor, and I went to one of the little one-room schoolhouses just down the road from where I was raised in West Elgin. At SS number 12. We were very small. There were some years we only had 7 people, so it was very difficult to play games. Baseball, we always played scrub because we couldn't have teams.
Were you a good student?
Oh, fantastic. Just fantastic. I think I was an average student. When I think back, in the one-room schoolhouse, you had different grades. So we'd finish our lessons, and then you sort of leaned over and you could hear what the next class was talking about. So it was one of the ways of learning different.
So then you went to West Elgin Secondary. And what did you do after that? What did you want to be when you grew up?
I was always, I think, drifting toward broadcasting. I use that term drifting loosely, but that's essentially what I was doing. I was always interested in broadcasting. I guess there was a lot of news around the house. It was always, the radio was always on. There were always newscasts on. Watched television news at night. The newspaper was there every day, and built from that. And also reading. The libraries were so important to me because I started books. And
did you have to do formal education to get into broadcasting? How did you get started?
Back in those days, I took a course from a private group, and I don't even think they exist anymore. But it was a home study course, and essentially what it did was gave some of us the courage to start looking for jobs. And at that point, the education wasn't a major hurdle as far as broadcasters were concerned. They wanted you to work. They wanted you to work long hours, and they didn't want to pay you much. But you were quite welcome to come and sort of learn your craft. And that's what broadcasting really is. I've always felt that broadcasting and journalism are really sort of a craft you build on.
Where was your first job?
CJCS in Stratford, 500 watts by day, 250 watts by night. So most stereos now have more power than we had at night. But we did everything. I was an announcer, I was a news reader, I was a disc jockey, I ran the board, I signed on and signed off, I touched equipment, played the national anthem, said good morning and good night to people.
And so then where did you go?
I went from there to CJOB in London. Again, I was working in the newsroom, and I was also working as a disc jockey. So that was there 2-3 years there in a variety of roles, and that's always been was always a big part of my broadcasting career. I go to these stations, and you'd end up doing something else than what you expected that you're going to be doing. So again, the learning experience, you the old 4-H thing, you learn to do by doing. That's and you hone things, you realize what worked and what doesn't. You realize why you shut your microphone off, and you realize when you have to have your microphone turned on.
So you moved, I know you had a long career as a well-known anchor at CFPL London. And how did you get to that point?
From London radio, we moved to Kingston, which was a radio and television operation, and it was my first exposure to television. And so we began by, again, we did everything. We shot film. Some of mine was actually in focus sometimes. We learned to develop film. That was scary, working in a dark room with a bunch of chemicals that I'd never played with before. And then reading the newscasts as an anchor. And again, you keep developing. You hopefully you learn to be a better writer and a better broadcaster. And 3 years in Kingston, covering all kinds of stories from City Hall to the prison system, and then moved on to Ottawa, which probably a bigger emphasis on the politics of things. It was a big station. They did a lot of production for networks and whatnot. So you started to work with some of the network correspondents and what they did. And there were some very strong people at excuse me at CJOH who were able to guide us along and show us things that just made our work, I think, a little smoother, a little better, and to open our eyes to some of the other stories that we could do. So we would spend more time on long feature stories. We're still back doing spot news, but live reports and things like that. And each one takes a slightly different skill set, but
You would have seen a lot of changes over your career. I know, like a lot of industries, journalism has been disrupted by the internet. Did you experience that yourself?
The internet was just coming into play when I started to freelance. So yeah, you could see it. But the biggest thing in broadcasting was probably the way technology changed. And I guess is still changing, but when I started out in television, we were shooting black and white and mostly silent. And then we moved to color. And then when I was in Ottawa, we made the transition home to videotape, and you go through the different types of videotape. We were on 2-inch and then 1-inch beta, and then slowly moving towards digital. And all the way through, the technology just keeps changing. So that was one of the things that was probably more difficult. Some of the best advice I got, and this was in Ottawa, somebody said, "Al, don't touch anything. Don't touch it." And so I didn't. I did my job as a reporter, as an announcer, as an anchor, but I never really learned how to make teams work, concentrate on what I was supposed to be doing.
So did you retire or rewire at the end of your broadcast?
I suppose rewire is probably closest to it. I had always thought about trying the freelance thing and trying to like voiceovers, commercial productions, in what we called industrials, training films. And then I did have some fun for quite a few years. I was a part-time instructor at Fanshawe College in their journalism course, and got to meet some of the on the way up. And so now I go across the dial and I say, "Oh, I remember her. I remember him." So it was fun, but that was a way of sort of keeping in touch with industry.
And I know you've made some wonderful videos about our local history stories.
Yeah, that was interesting too, because I was meeting different people. Because with local history, of course, so much of it is local. That's where the stories are. You can do the big national thing and you can read books on it, but when you start to get into the local stuff, you begin to hear the stories, and you begin to hear where people aren't quite sure exactly what happened that year. And you go back and and try and figure out, okay, well, here was what was happening in the rest of the country, what was happening here, and things like that. But I met some people who were really well informed on things like War of 1812, Battle of the Longwoods, a local thing.
And
Yeah,
then you
so
had the courage to write books. I've read the first of your 4 books, or at least my first of your 4 books, The Angry Sky. How did you have the courage to write 4 historical novels?
It started out, the first one was, it became A Porous Border, but for several years, it was on my computer just as experiment. And I had gotten interested in Canada and the American Civil War because there was not an awful lot of material that I could find on that. And the deeper I got into it, the more stuff I found that was interesting. But there were some problems as I got to the end of what I thought I was going to write. It probably would have been nonfiction. And then I realized I didn't have the full story. And I didn't think I was ever going to get the full story. Some of it was budget related, trying to get to American archives and things like that. I just didn't have the wherewithal to do it. So I thought, well, it'd probably be more honest, just call it a novel and write it that way. So that was the first one, and that was kind of fun. So I went from there and started looking. When you talk about the American Civil War, you start to see the impact that it was having on Canada and the drive toward Confederation. And then those final 2 or 3 years in the drive to Confederation, you realize just how tenuous things were. And so that was really interesting into. And in looking at some figures, you hear the name Darcy McGee, and he it's way back in the past. But then you start looking around, and you can picture this real character, and then you begin to realize that they were traveling more, and they came across a speech that Darcy McGee had given at what was the forerunner of the Western Fair in London. So it's little things like that makes you wonder. And so I decided to try, and some people bought the book, and some people read it, and the rest, as they say, is history. I moved on to 1917, probably because I didn't know. I had the headline of the Great War, but I didn't know what was involved, and so you begin to things and read more and look at different perspectives. And I always found in my personal life that I read a lot of historical fiction, because there were times that I just did not have time to read that 400, 500 page autobiography. But I would pick up some historical fiction and find I was intrigued. So I get a snapshot, and then if I wanted to, I could go back and look for more. And so that's really been the whole thing with what's driven books is the education of Al McGregor. You're going back and just trying to figure things out. What would people have thought? What were their social conditions? What were they hearing from other people? And trying to develop them that way. And I think the other thing is that if anyone really complains about what I've written, put my hands up in the air and say, hey, it's a novel.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Al, for writing those novels. Your descendants will be proud. And thanks for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.